and welcome back to the show. This week we have Kimberly Shannon Murphy, who is regarded by many as one of the very best in her field of stunts. Been a performer for many, many years and is responsible for a number of extraordinary pieces of action, many of which we will talk about in our interview. She'll also talk about a rather exciting project that's on the horizon, which you may find very interesting indeed. So please enjoy this and welcome Kimberly Shannon Murphy. You started out, if I'm not mistaken, doing gymnastics, and then you made a kind of transition to what's it referred to? Acrobatics, I suppose, for live shows. Did you have a game plan in back then when you thought that was a natural move from one to the other? Was that ever a consideration with you?
No, I was actually a dancer as well as a gymnast. I danced with Alvin Ailey with their professional program for about a year, and then got into Anti-Gravity, which was more of an acrobatic performance company, much like Cirque du Soleil. And a lot of my friends were starting to get into stunts. And back then we were mailing everything. There was no internet. I mean, if it was very early on. So we were like, we were physically mailing our headshots. And so my friends sort of encouraged me to send my stuff to some coordinators in New York. And I didn't really even know anything about the business or really understand it. But about a week later, George Aguilar called me.
Right.
And he still is, but at that time was kind of running New York. So yeah, he was doing a movie with Uma Thurman and needed a double. So that was my first job.
It's not a bad first job, is it? I mean,
No.
you hear about people having to work their backsides off on commercials and TV, and you get a phone call going, "Hey, you want to do a movie?" Oh, okay, that's not bad.
Yes, but I was pounding the pavement for a long time, just doing performance stuff. And then I did do an Old Navy commercial. That was technically my first SAG job.
Okay.
And then I had to audition for that film. So he brought me in, but I did probably a month of rehearsals so they could just kind of see how I moved, and then made the final decision about if I was going to get the job or not.
And of course, well, that's obviously another tick in the box, because on the basis of that, she said, yes, she's the one. So one in the arm there, certainly. And of course, is this My Super Ex-Girlfriend? Is that how that started? Right, okay. So that was the first job in 2006. 2004. Was it not released until a bit later? So you did your work in 2004.
Yes.
George Aguilar, as you said, was the stunt coordinator, and there's a moment in that movie where Uma's character is hit by a car, and flung across the road. Now that may be a combination of actions. Was there what are we talking, early days? So maybe an air ram and then maybe a ratchet of some shape or form. Do you remember how that was created?
Yes, we did it in cuts. We did the Suburban driving in on the streets of New York.
Okay.
And kind of her on the street corner with it kind of coming behind her. And then we did the rest green screen. I did a ratchet, and then we did she goes into a table. We did that live on the street of New York, but the ratchet was done on green screen. Because that car was way too big to do a car hit with.
It was what was it? An estate car? You'd call it a station wagon, I suppose.
It was a Suburban,
Lots of it. I mean, it's interesting in that respect that I suppose from a public point of view, they see the moment and they see the character being hit by the car and then landing at point B. But what they don't realize, as you've just said there yourself, you said you did it in cuts. So you've done it in smaller sections, broken down along the way. We'll do this part first, and then we'll do that part. And all right, as people go, well, it's a car hit, but that's a lot of work to put all of that together. And they don't maybe appreciate the amount of work that goes into that type of gag.
Yes. we do it a lot better now, but in the sense of quicker, and we have better ways that we do it now than then, I feel like.
Well, certainly technology has moved on, hasn't it? And so you now have the ability to, those thoughts that you had back then, wouldn't it be great if you can actually do that now and make it much simpler? You were based in New York for a number of years before moving out to LA. Again, was that something that had to happen in order for the career to, was this something you were thinking about? If in order for me to move on here, I'm going to have to try and see what the world's like out there on the coast?
I was thinking about it, but when I did I Am Legend, we had a lot of LA guys come out. And it, especially back then, it was a very different caliber of stunt people. New York and LA, the jobs were so much more massive out in LA. And if there was a big film happening in New York, they always brought in a LA coordinator.
Okay.
So I did that movie with all LA guys, and I learned a lot from them. And then when I started doubling Cameron Diaz, she kind of, took me in as her double. And then I started just going with her, which is kind of what landed me in LA. And then I just never left, pretty much.
No, well, that's it. Again, it's on reputation, isn't it? I suppose it's on reputation, it's on experience, and also how well you get on with those individuals. Uma, obviously very keen on having you there, and Cameron in exactly the same situation. I suppose if all of those boxes are being ticked, then it would be ridiculous to go, I'm just going to go back to New York now and I'm going to carry on over there. You stay put because that's, that there's maybe that fluidity of work happening.
Yes. And also, ultimately the highest point of any stunt person's career is doubling, these massive actors, because you learn the most, you do the most gags, you learn how to, part of our job is not just doing the stunts. When you're paired with an actress who trusts you, who's, a very famous person, you learn how, like, a lot of other things that you have to do to take care of them, to make sure they have everything they need. It's more than just showing up on set and doing, as we call, nondescript stunt, where you're just, kind of there to do a ratchet, or you're there, you're not doing the whole. Yeah, you're not a main double, and it makes a big difference in how you learn the business.
There are, and I urge people to. I will put a link in the bottom of this video for people who haven't seen Kimberly's work, because there's a wonderful stunt reel that she's got, some early bits and pieces, although I think this one's up to about 2019, 2020, possibly, this particular reel that I was looking at. And there's a couple of really quite iconic moments in it, I must admit. There's a terrific couple of falls as well. American Horror Story is one that really does spring to mind. And again, it looks like it's a wire, and it's a combination of some wire stuff and some free falling. Would you be able to kind of just talk us through some of that? Because again, it works now. You look at it now, all those years later, and still go, there's a sharp intake of breath when you're looking at it, because it really does stand the test of time. How did that particular gag come about?
That was on a descender. That was probably a 60-foot fall, and so they shot me doing it, falling, and then descenders sort of stop you before you hit the ground. So about 10 feet from the ground, it sort of stops you.
Right.
And then we did a few shots of Lily, with the camera above her, just kind of falling probably 10 feet so they could get her face.
Okay.
And then we came downstairs and we shot the ground piece, which I kind of just hung out of frame, like above frame, probably 6 feet above frame, hanging flat, and then they just drop me to the ground. So then we get the impact piece.
It's still, that's just marvelous. That really, really good. And are there those moments when you look back, because obviously, you'd have compiled all this bits and pieces, or you've had all the footage and stuff, you put it all together. And are there moments when you go back and go, bloody hell, that was good. That really was good. Do you still have that moment where you think that's as good as it was on the day when you did it the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always have those jobs that we really enjoy doing, that, um, that we can be really proud of, for sure. Yeah.
Well, and again, there's another. Now I want to see if I got this right. It is, and this is quite a clever one because, and you said yourself, it was quite complicated. Apparently, it's a thing called a show. We didn't get it over here, right? Maybe it was a show or a movie, but I think it was a show called The Mick, which we didn't get over here. And I believe that you were doubling Caitlin Olsen.
Yes.
As far as this is concerned, and it's a very, very interesting gag about diving into a swimming pool. And we've all seen, it's a great comedic moment, which has been done in the past in various shapes and forms. And in the old silent days, I believe Buster Keaton would have done it for real in those days. Obviously, there's health and safety prevails these days, but a remarkable sequence of diving into a pool, and then just there's an impact, and the legs are still up in the top of over the top of the water. Again, how does that get created to have that? It's because it's done for laughs, right?
Yes. We tried to do that because it was in a shallow pool. Right. It was probably 4 feet, maybe 5. We tried to do it off of a trampoline at first.
Okay.
So I was doing it off of a tramp, and I was just kind of bracing my hands to hit the bottom to try to get, because they really wanted to get the feel. The idea in the episode is that she smashes her face into the bottom of the pool. So they really wanted to get that feeling of seeing the legs like really hit, seeing the impact.
Seeing the impact, and then the movement of the limbs as that impact took place, right?
And the trampoline just wasn't doing that. It wasn't giving it much, like, enough aggressive movement.
Okay.
So we did it on wires, and we had like a end mark. So, I kind of had to go in, and they sort of set an end mark for me on the wire. So as soon as I dove, I could only go so far.
Right.
So when I dove in, it gave that like bounce back almost of it really selling that I hit the bottom of the pool.
Because what now I find fascinating, now you've explained it, is that originally you were just doing it as a free dive off the tramp into the water. And when obviously people are watching that footage as we're speaking now, when they look at that, they notice the amount of air that you've got from the tramp to then get into that position of almost being upright, to then brace. The idea in your mind that you could brace the floor of the pool with your hands is a remarkable thing to do. Logically, now you go, it's got to be a wire gag, surely. And then, of course, to move on to the wire gag after that, I think we can do this, guys. We can do it.
Yeah.
And I know
a lot of water at my nose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. That must have been how many times did you have to do that? You're going to tell me like 400 now.
No, I mean, we rehearsed it a lot. So probably all in all, I probably did it like 30 times.
Okay. That's still a lot, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a lot of pool chlorine water for one day. But again, these are the things that maybe people don't appreciate when they look at these type of gags, and the amount of things that you've had to put into doing it. And there's also, many films that our viewers and listeners will be familiar with that you've worked on. Spider-Man 3, back doubling Uma on that thing called The Life Before Her Eyes, and Accidental Husband, Cameron Diaz doubling on What Happens in Vegas. What does it take to be a good double? I mean, how much homework do you as a performer have to do in order to not only double the character but double the actor portraying that role?
Well, I think especially when you get comfortable with an actress, especially Cameron and I and Caitlin and I as well, we move very similarly. You have to kind of watch how they move, like if she's, any of my actresses, I'm always watching them on the monitors to see what they're doing up until the stunt happens.
Yep.
Because you kind of have to replicate their movement, because we always lay it over. So if they're running and then they fall, they do the run and I do the fall.
Yep.
But I have to then do their run as well, because there has to be that a little bit of a lap over. So you have to get really good at, if you want it to sell really well, to really watch them and their body mechanics and how they move, so that you can look like them and it doesn't look like it's somebody else doing it.
No, exactly. And are there those occasions when the actress says to you, what's that thing you're doing? Because you've spotted something that they're unaware of, and you go, no, I'm just doing that thing that you do, and you go, I do that thing, really? Is there a sort of self-conscious thing that suddenly happens automatically?
That's never happened to me yet.
Yet. I've spoken to a few people who said, yeah, no, I've started doing this thing, and the actors come over and go, what are you doing with your arm? What?
Yeah.
What's that thing you're doing? Well, you do it. I do it? Oh my God, when did I start doing that? I said, I don't know. I just picked it up as you went along, you know.
That's so funny.
That's how these things, they sort of, you know, like a sponge. You become a sponge because you start soaking up everything that they're doing to try and, as you say, get to that point where they are then the character doing the thing and you have to take over. It's fascinating on some of those bits and pieces, I must say. We touched on Cameron Diaz there, and of course we really should talk about the one thing that is particularly important, I think, from you and from Cameron's point of view, which is Night and Day, because that type of movie allowed you to do. And I've watched it quite recently again, and there's a great deal of stuff that you're doing in camera, you know, and you're having to do the physical movements on top there, and of course, most importantly, you got to work with Casey. On this picture as well. Were you an item then? Were you? Is this before you became husband and wife? How did that happen?
We met on that film.
You met on that movie. See, who says nothing comes out? So look at this. Isn't this really? It's all. Oh, it's wonderful. It's champagne and roses. So you get to work, you know, and of course, this is maybe a metaphor for the rest of your life.
Well, interestingly enough, on that film, Casey doubled Tom for 13 years. Yep. So, but on that movie, Tom had two doubles. He had a motorcycle double.
Right.
And then Casey did everything else.
Okay.
So Jimmy Roberts did all of the motorbike stuff. So I was with Jimmy most of the time because most of her stunts were on the bike.
Okay.
So, yeah.
It's quite an elaborate motorcycle sequence. Jimmy, of course, is a motorcycling legend. I mean, he's done all sorts of bits and pieces. If you've ever seen a motorbike flying through the air over the years, it's either Buddy Joe Hooker or him. You know, that's often the situation. The transferring, I'm interested to make the comparison between the Bond movie, Tomorrow Never Dies, because I know that there was a similar movements transferring from the position that you're in, either on the front of the bike, transferring around him, then to get to the back of the bike, or vice versa. How did you work that out? Did you have to work that out in? Was it simpler to work it out as the bike was moving, or did you work out some initial movements whilst the bike was stationary? Said this is what we'd like as far as the camera positions are concerned, and you have to adapt it accordingly with Jimmy.
That was probably one of the hardest stunts I ever did, because we couldn't, you know, we did the stunt without helmets on. Right. Now they'll do stuff where they'll put helmets underneath people's wigs, which we didn't have then. But it was really difficult because we couldn't practice it with helmets on because we had to be so close to each other on the bike.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So the helmets would have totally thrown us off as to what we had to do. So we practiced it. We figured out how we were going to do it with the bike standing still. And then it was kind of just like, we just had to do it. You know, we kind of figured out, okay, I think this is what's going to work, but now we have to just ride the bike and we just have to do it. So it was sort of terrifying in that sense, because, you know, if something would have went wrong with that stunt, we would both be dead for sure.
Yeah, that's not a great side, is it? I mean, admittedly, but the thing is, this is where, and we have this conversation a lot on social media, and people saying, well, you know, that's the thing about daredevils, but that's where this is different, because there's people say, oh, there's a fine line between being a daredevil and a stuntman. There isn't. There's a huge chasm between being a daredevil and a stuntman. Obviously, as you've just said yourself, working everything out to the last detail and finding a flaw, if you will, to say, right, we can now overcome this. It was tricky before, but now we know exactly where we are. There's always that risk Yet,
Yeah.
you have to work everything out and make it accommodate it. With the idea that obviously things have changed so much technically, and we touched earlier on a little bits of CGI and bits and pieces. Nowadays, of course, the movies are way different to how they were back originally. I don't want to use the phrase "back in the day" because that phrase keeps changing, or that timeline keeps changing. There are people who were talking about 5 years ago using the phrase "back in the day." Now it's very complicated. But in those periods of the 90s, certainly, and now, there is that huge chasm of difference between one and the other. You've been involved very recently, of course, on possibly the biggest movie on the planet that's ever been on the movie ever, which, of course, is the new Top Gun picture. And the excitement surrounding that, and the way in which the actors are, instead of doing the green screen back at the studio, they're in the plane. There's all of that to be taken into consideration. Do you think that the change in the way in which movies are made now, particularly action, is for the better? Is it better for the audience, and more importantly, is it better for the performers?
I think the reason why Top Gun did so well, and Tom is a complete perfectionist at his job, and he's known for doing things that nobody else has ever done. Like when we did MI4, and he was the first person ever to jump off the Burj Khalifa, which is the tallest building in the world, which Casey did as well. But I think the reason why Top Gun is being so, was kind of like eaten up by the world is because, in my personal opinion, and I've done a ton of Marvel stuff, but everyone's really kind of run off with the CGI stuff, and there's it's fun, but it's also very cartoonish, and there's a lot of like unrealistic things, I feel like, personally, and I think it takes away from our business a little bit.
Yes.
So I think what was so great about Top Gun is the Navy was hugely involved in all of it, and it was a great story, and just the way that we shot it way before COVID, so it was supposed to be released the summer of 2020, and he held on to it because it really is something you have to see in the theaters. And he was really smart about that, and I just think it's it was done real, like for real. It wasn't something that they came and superimposed over everything. So I think that's part of why the audience has taken to it like they have.
And also on that subject, do you think that stunts are still stunts for the purpose of, there's so much health and safety these days, and there's so much CGI, and there's so much other bits and elements to creating a sequence or creating a gag. You still, I mean, obviously from a performer's point of view, you still get, the heart doing 10 to the dozen, you still get, the butterflies, and then that everything's right just before they say action. But is that because of all those extra elements? Does it take anything away from the difficulty in the job that you're trying to perform?
Well, I think, and that's another film too, when we did Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with Quentin, and we won Best Fight for that final fight. I think, the other fights that we were up against were also amazing fight sequences, but because they're using the CGI, like I said, our fight was 100% for real. Everything was shot for real. Everything was completely, nothing was, superimposed, nothing was CGI. And I think that people are missing that aspect of film now.
Yeah.
And so when they do see it, and they really appreciate it, and I don't even think they realize why they appreciate it so much, but because they're seeing all these like Spider-Mans and all these kind of universe sort of different kind of films.
It does make a difference, doesn't it? Reality is the key. If you have that moment where in the middle of a fight you're flinching, or you're doing something because you can see that that he actually landed that punch. Those times there's no pulling punches in this particular sequence, or it's done for real. It does make a big difference. Absolutely. Well, I think we should maybe look at something else now, because I know that you've very recently got some very exciting news, and I think that you're happy to share that with us. I'm thrilled to find out what it is, because I don't know. Genuinely, I do not know, and so this is extremely exciting for me. So I will give the floor to you, and you tell us what's the hype about this particular job that you're referring to.
Well, I've been hanging on to this news for 3 months, and uh, Cameron Diaz and I have become very close friends, and she's an amazing human. But she kind of called me 3 months ago and said, "Look, I'm because she retired. She retired. She was done." And we would all joke, like her team. We're all close friends. It would be so great if you could just, if we could all just do one more movie together, that'd be so fun. And she would always just say, I'm done, I'm done. She was doing it for 20 years and
Yeah.
just kind of started a family and just was in a different place. And then she called me and said, I took a movie. And I said,
You did a what?
and she goes, I said, you took a what? And she said, I took a movie. And I'm like, oh my God. And she's like, it's all action. And so it was kind of really just awesome. But then I had to hold on to the news because she wasn't allowed to, they wanted to really announce it in a cool way because she hasn't done a film in 8 years.
Okay.
So they did this, she's doing it with Jamie Foxx. It's her and Jamie Foxx, and it's an action comedy. And we'll start shooting at the kind of October, November of this year. And yeah, it's going to be really fun, and she's excited. And so they released it in a really, I don't know if you saw the reel, how they released it, but it was her and Jamie Foxx on a phone call. And she's talking about how she's nervous about, she doesn't know how to kind of come out of retirement. And then he says, oh, I'm going to click someone on that can help you. So he clicks in Tom Brady.
Okay.
And then Tom Brady says, I heard you need some tips on how to come out of retirement. And I've successfully done that. So it was really smart the way they released it, really funny. And so we're excited. Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's spectacular. Well done. And you're in as her double, presumably?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So, and that starts filming later on in the year, you said?
Yeah.
Magnificent. Do we have a title? We've got a working title at the moment. Do we know what it is? No.
I don't know anything else.
Don't know anything else. Don't ask me anything else. I may have to kill you afterwards. I understand.
I don't know. I don't know the title. And normally we, with films like that, we usually have a working title, and then it changes. Yeah.
And it's interesting. And that's a very interesting point. Just finally, before we close, there's an interesting point there, because I know who Cameron Diaz is. There's half the world will, but there is a percentage of people, because she's been away for so long, who won't know her.
Well, my daughter doesn't.
Right.
I have an 8-year-old, and she calls her Aunt Cameron, and she has no idea that she's famous. And so we were actually at the grocery store about a year ago, and she was on the cover of something. I don't know what it was, but my daughter's like, Mom, Auntie Cameron's her face. She's like collecting the magazines and putting them in she's like, we have to buy them all. Yeah. How can they put her face out? It was hilarious. Because that younger generation doesn't really.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
So.
Wow. Well, that's fantastic news. It's a great piece of information to find out on a Friday afternoon that all of a sudden Cameron Diaz is back. That's going to be huge. Yeah. And more importantly, you're going to be back as too. That's exceptional. So it's great that you're working with her on that. That's going to be sensational, and it's a great thrill to talk to you. I know we've been trying to organise little bits and pieces on it, but you've only yourself to blame for being so damn good and so damn busy, frankly. But we've managed to tie it all up together. And Kimberly, I want to thank you very much indeed for giving me some of your time today.
Of course, thank you.
So there you go, exciting stuff. That was great fun for me to do, as I'm a huge fan of hers, and Cameron Diaz as well. Didn't see that one coming, to be fair. So that was a little while ago we did that interview, but nevertheless it's still very exciting to think about it now. So Cameron Diaz is back. She's back with Jamie Foxx. The movie is called Back in Action. Of course, it's called Back in Action. What a great title. And you'll be able to see that on Netflix next year sometime. Kimberly has agreed to come back and tell us all about how exciting it was to make that movie when it's out on general release. No issues then as far as NDAs are concerned, which is always beneficial. So that's it for now. We hope you've enjoyed that, and join us all again next week for more of the same. Until then, bye for now.